everyone. I'm Sophie, and welcome to Two Broads Talking Politics. Tonight, I and your other host, Kelly, have two fantastic guests here to talk with us about science and politics, especially in the new administration. So we have Brian, who is an informal science educator, and Gary, who is a chair of biology at a large research institution.
All right. Thanks, Sophie. So, I think science and politics is something that probably a lot more people are thinking about recently than had been previously. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But, I think that what we're seeing out of the Trump administration is possibly an unprecedented war on science. Would you all agree with that?
Yeah, I think actually, though, that's been going on for some time. And it just kind of came to the head during the Trump administration. I've been around in science since before Ronald Reagan, but during the Reagan administration, that's when the religious right really began to sort of mount an anti-science, I would say, campaign. It started with evolution, and I think the obvious development was to just disbelieve any science that doesn't seem to fit into what you want the world to be.
Yeah, I think that's true. We've got, of course, a Republican Congress, and we have for a while. That predates, having the Trump president, of course. So, I think we've certainly been seeing things out of the Republican Congress for a while. It does seem like things are sort of heating up now.
Well, and I think we have to be careful. A lot of Republican senators are not disbelievers. It just seems to be what they call their base tends to, I think, be very anti-science.
Well, you saw that during the run-up to the election, in the primaries, and during the primary debates for the Republican Party. There were questions asking people to raise their hand if they believed in climate change or in global warming. So it was sort of a test for office, at least for the presidency.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that.
Yeah, and I think something you just said, distinguishing between senators and representatives, is important, I think, in a lot of what is going on right now in politics. Because it does seem that a lot of the senators, are a little bit more cautious, are perhaps a little bit more intellectual, and a lot of the representatives, whether they really are or they're just playing to their very small constituencies, seem to be a little closer to what we think of as the Trump base.
Well, one big difference is senators have a 6-year term. So they're not always thinking about the next election, frankly. Mm-hmm. They have a period of time when they actually do, I think, more genuinely think through issues. Where in the House of Representatives, they're campaigning every 2 years. They're basically always campaigning.
Yeah, so maybe that's something we should think about as constituents, trying to figure out where the pressure points are. So obviously, mm-hmm. Representatives you can get to by appealing to their electability, right? So in saying your constituents want you to vote this way, and if you don't, we'll vote you out in 2 years or less. And approaching senators is a little bit of a different story.
I'm under the impression that the Paris Climate Agreement was actually fairly popular among the American people. It wasn't horribly unpopular, so I think a lot of people were not surprised, but dismayed, people who aren't even necessarily super liberal, to find that we were being withdrawn from the agreement, or at least that the president was interested in withdrawing from the agreement, which it's pretty interesting. Kelly and I were talking about this earlier, that President Trump said that he was going to withdraw us from the agreement, and then he said that he wasn't, and then he said that he was. And now the latest story is that Tillerson, the Secretary of State, said that, well, he's not going to, but he's open to, he is going to withdraw us from the Paris Agreement, but he's open to not withdrawing us from the Paris Agreement. So there's a lot of uncertainty even within the administration about how they want to proceed and what they think about the science behind climate change. I think there's a lot of attempts to placate the base while also not looking completely crazy.
Well, specifically with the most recent stories around the Paris Agreement, the language was something like they would consider re-entering the agreement if they could do it on their own terms, which is obviously just to play to people who want them to stay out, because the Paris Agreement includes conducting all of these things on your own terms. How you comply with the terms of the Paris Agreement is up to each country. They get to do it on their own terms. Mm-hmm. So to say something like that, it's either ignorance of the actual agreement, or it's just language to try to placate the base and tell people they're doing something.
Mm-hmm.
Now, are you all referring to this recent overture by the administration to the European community on the climate change agreement?
Yeah, the recent sort of uproar over comments that were made.
My take on it is Trump has no convictions.
Mm-hmm.
That he is always making the calculation, what makes him look more powerful,
mm-hmm.
what gives him more clout. And what I find interesting recently is after two historic hurricanes, suddenly they're kind of backtracking again on this. So it's like every once in a while reality seeps in. I think the Secretary of State might be a little bit more rational, believe it or not, with this, even though he's an ex-CEO of Exxon. But he seems to actually believe in climate change. So he may be, in light of the fact of these hurricanes and the reality of those, it may be sort of influencing a number of people in the White House in ways that we may not know. I don't know.
I also wonder if any part of this is sort of politically based in the sense that we can't actually withdraw quickly from the climate accords. And so we wouldn't be able to withdraw until it's like 2 days after the 2020 election. And so if you say you're pulling out of the climate accords, the 2020 election really becomes sort of a referendum on that.
Right. And they may be just trying to wait it out as long as they can.
Yeah, that could be as well.
So I have a question for both Gary and Brian. You both spend time talking about science with other people as a science educator and as a professor. And so I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about whether or not you see science denial and science misinformation when talking to people as part of your jobs, and if the amount that you've seen has changed recently.
Well, of course, I'm seeing a biased audience in my case because most people I talk science with are science majors, for the most part. Actually, I think I've seen where I am. I think I've seen a little less skepticism when I first started at Youngstown State University. Many of our freshman biology, not many, but there were a considerable number of freshman biology students that would explicitly say they don't believe in evolution. And I don't hear that much anymore. I don't know what to make of that, but there's a lot less of it, at least in my perception of it.
Interesting. So a decline, you would say, in the number of people who deny evolution. Do you think that's more because fewer people who would be denying evolution would end up in your science classes, or?
That may be true. Now, YSU is much more selective in its entrance requirements than it was in 1995 when I got here. That could be part of it. And I still think, though, people that really don't believe in science is a minority. Most people just don't want to talk about it necessarily. Maybe because it's become so politicized. Maybe that's it, too. They just don't want to admit one way or the other.
Interesting. Brian, do you have anything to add?
I think that I don't see a lot of people who already have an opinion on a scientific matter that I would consider an unscientific opinion. I do find a lot of people, though, that are just really uninformed. They're not aware of a lot of science issues. They don't have real high basic science literacy. And so I think those people really are an opportunity when we get to reach them and help inform them about science so they can, learn about both the process of science and the realities of the world we live in. Every once in a while, I run into people who have a particular opinion, whether it be usually around evolution and the types of things that I'm teaching, but also sometimes having to do with climate, or even every once in a while we have people who are, vaccine deniers or things like that. But I think most of the time when I run into people who have ideas that are unscientific, it is not a strongly held belief. It is just, they're just not well informed.
And the people that you're mostly talking to, what age ranges are these people in?
I speak mostly with families with school-age children. Every once I do talk to adults also in my line. So, and it's the adults typically that have conversations with me that are, a little bit different than what I'm presenting. Typically I'm presenting on a particular topic, and then people will stick around afterwards and chat with me. And those people are usually just take it in whatever direction they want. That's typically the adults. That's mom and dad who want to have a conversation with someone because they're curious about science and they have questions that they don't know how to find the answers to.
So what do you think? I mean, obviously you would need different approaches to reach kids versus adults, but what sorts of approaches can we be using? Go crazy, all sorts of different things we could be doing to try to get more people to just think about science and have a basic science literacy.
Well, one thing we gotta take advantage of natural phenomena that happen, like these hurricanes or like the eclipse. We saw a lot of interest in the general public when the eclipse was occurring here not too long ago. In fact, we had a lot of people just came onto campus to see if they could borrow something from the physics department to view the eclipse. And so we found that a teachable moment. A lot of professors were out just talking outside with folks about the eclipse. I think it does two things. It sort of reassures them that it's healthy to have an interest in science and nature, and it also starts to give the general public the idea that we're just people too. We have families, and we have a home mortgage in some cases and things like that. So the less alien, I think, scientists make themselves seem, the better. I think that's one fault of professional scientists like me. We tend to not be very good at PR, to put it quite frankly. And that needs to change. And I think the scientific societies are kind of aware of that. Some of them have public relations committees now and work on their public persona.
I occasionally lead a training for scientists to be able to talk to the general public better about science, and specifically to kids. So some of the things that I talk about in that training are, making this relatable, making this something that people want to hear about, and they want to know how this is relevant to them. And that can be really tough because, scientists want to be really careful to not oversell their work and promise something they can't deliver. You also see a lot of people saying, like, well, it's not exactly that, it's not precise, so I don't want to be imprecise in my language. And the language of science can be kind of obscuring and technical. So trying to break things down into language that holds the interest of the person you're talking to, be that a child or an adult who's just sort of casual and listening, or a congressperson or some sort of policymaker, you want to put it in language that will relate to them specifically.